Glad to be here and really do appreciate the opportunity to interact with folks. Thanks to INSA, our sponsors today, AT&T and Juniper. Thanks to all of you coming out. It's my first time here at this new Hyatt Regency. It's really interesting to see how the Tysons Corner area is developed and the metro and all that. It's in my backyard. I live out in Reston, but interesting to see the evolution. Virtualization is a topic today. I want to talk about it first in terms of giving some background on our mission and what we do at the PMISE, our view in terms of looking at the landscape. We work heavily in the domestic nexus of national security and public safety. And then I want to end by talking about our view on virtualization at the information layer, virtualizing policy. We're administratively housed in the OD&I. I've been in this role for about 5 years, but we work government-wide responsible information sharing, and our vision is national security through responsible information sharing. We're not operational. We work with an incredible web of partners, federal agencies, state and local governments, private sector, national associations, international allies. Our role is really leadership and policy, bringing folks together. Am I advancing the slides, or can you advance in the back? Okay, thanks. So, this is a quote from the President's National Strategy for Information Sharing and Safeguarding. This was issued in 2012, and it lays out our vision. And in a nutshell, it's the right information at the right time to the right people, without technology barriers, only gated by legitimate law and policy. It's a pretty expansive vision, and it goes across the entire national security and public safety space. It doesn't expand the scope of the information sharing environment to that broad reach, but it does really point out the need to collaborate and share information responsibly to keep the American people safe and to enhance national security. It guides what we do. Next slide. Thank you. So, when we look at our space, and our office comes out of the tragic events of 9/11, and we've been working this for about a decade now. OD&I, PMISE, a lot of the intelligence reforms have been in place for a while. When we look at our domestic landscape, it's incredibly fragmented. You look at this chart, and you see the complexity that we face. One of the things I like to point out, though, is that's a feature, not a bug, of our federated democracy. Right? We have the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, home rule, local control, 18,000 police departments in this country, 90% of which have 50 or fewer sworn officers. It's strong protection for privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. All of these things are inherent in our open society and in our constitutional democracy. We also have, though, incredible threats, right, with the evolution of technology, the terrorism threat. We're in the fourth generation of the terrorism threat, going from core al-Qaeda, federated al-Qaeda, returning foreign fighters, and now radicalization and mobilization in place. With cybersecurity, transnational organized crime, trafficking in persons, drug trafficking, heroin is in the news a lot these days. Tremendous crisis around that. The collaboration imperative has never been stronger. The need to have consistent, transparent, distributed policies that further strengthen protections for privacy. And at the end of the day, the ability to share information responsibly and effectively. When you look at this, it looks daunting, but we actually have some good news. We just gave our annual report to Congress. I'm going to highlight three things. Right? Number one is Neighborhood Watch for the Nation, suspicious activity reporting. See something, say something. It's been in place, tremendous support, tying together frontline law enforcement, intelligence, homeland security, defense, and foreign affairs. The National Network of Fusion Centers, an organic response after 9/11, has matured up nicely over the last number of years. We've also successfully aligned three epochs of policing, law enforcement, criminal intelligence, information sharing between the risk centers that came up in the 70s on the war on regional organized crime, the HIDA centers in the 80s and 90s, and the fusion centers themselves. A real interesting metric demonstrating the progress is we've successfully this last year tied together three national law enforcement event deconfliction systems. Those systems previously were stovepiped. since they've been live and interconnected about 5 months ago, 150,000 law enforcement operational events have been shared across those systems, and 800 inter-system conflicts have been identified. That's an officer safety issue, it's a collaboration issue, it's a coordination issue. Critical, operational law enforcement information. And then the third example, for the longest time, our sensitive and unclassified networks, the US government nationally, have been stovepiped. But in the last year, we've been able to, with our partners, deliver single sign-on across Intel Link, DHS's HISN, FBI's LEAP, and RISNet, and several other networks to where about 500,000 registered users now have single sign-on across those networks. We have a platform for information sharing across the country. More work to do, miles to go, but tremendous progress in the time since we've embarked on this endeavor to knit together Homeland Security, law enforcement, national security enterprise. Next slide. So it's an endeavor like this is about organizational culture change. And it's key to kind of lay out the governance map. How do we coordinate all of these different entities? I co-chair a White House policy committee with a partner on the National Security Council staff. That's where we coordinate at the federal level. Key to working with our mission partners in this domestic space is the Department of Justice's Criminal Intelligence Coordinating Council. It's very interesting how it works in this country because, again, 18,000 police departments, you can't bring everybody to the table. We work through the national professional associations. So the International Association of Chiefs of Police, major city chiefs, major county sheriffs. Recently, President Obama was in Chicago talking to the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference. That Sunday, we had a meeting of the Criminal Intelligence Coordinating Council. Director Clapper flew out, the Director Comey was there, Deputy Secretary Mayorkas, many other leaders across the federal government talking about these issues, coordinating to ensure that we have a unified approach. And then finally, the Standards Coordinating Council. That's where we bring in international standards organizations, government standards organizations, and industry associations, working on the underlying frameworks. And that bridges us to the topic today. Next slide. So we've done a lot of work over the past decade on frameworks like the National Information Exchange Model, reference architectures for integration, so many other things. We've taken these different tools and packaged them in something we call Project Interoperability and moved it out underneath the Standards Coordinating Council. But where we want to go forward is to leverage some really exciting work that's come out of the NIST, looking at virtualizing policy and federating trust. At the end of the day, when you look at this complex environment we operate in, and this is true, I think, across the board, you're not going to have a single cloud, you're not going to have a single solution. You're going to have to federate different trust frameworks, different policy frameworks, different technologies. We're focused on federating at the policy level. Federating trust, looking at atomic security and privacy controls based on the NIST frameworks. Those atomic controls are things that are understandable, things like policy around issuing credentials, policy around managing attributes associated with individuals, policy around how you retain information and things like that. Those individual controls, again, based on the NIST frameworks, can be expressed in human-readable form, but also in machine-readable form. Those atomic controls can be assessed and audited against, and you can demonstrate compliance against those controls, and those controls can be discovered at runtime. So we're moving in that direction in terms of automating policy. I'll give you a couple of concrete examples. In the space we operate, FBI's CJIS, Criminal Justice Information Services, security policy is the gold standard for law enforcement information sharing. The FBI audits law enforcement agencies. If you adhere to this policy, you're able to effectively share law enforcement information, both with the Bureau and it's leveraged by others for sharing between states and so forth. It's a document that looks a lot like the FISMA type of frameworks in the federal government that are under the Federal CIO Council. Well, we have a pilot project underway right now, taking this trust mark approach and refactoring the CJIS security policy Also looking at the Federal CIO Council FICAM roadmap, the National Association of State CIOs, their equivalent security policy, right? Breaking those policies up into the atomic security controls, doing the crosswalks so that you can demonstrate and have interoperability between these different frameworks in a virtualized manner. Another example, the state of Alabama used the same approach to bridge between the law enforcement constraints to CJIS security policy and the framework in health and human services, something called HIPAA. A lot of times when you get two different communities of interest that want to share, shields come up because it's too challenging. It's too hard to imagine how you might be able to deal with, a big set of controls and a Word document that's 300 or 400 pages long, that's anchored in governance structures and vocabulary that are foreign to you. But when you break it down into the specific privacy and security controls in the healthcare space, in the law enforcement space, you find tremendous overlap. Right? A lot of times it's one-to-one. A lot of times it's 50%, 90%. But you're able to make risk-based decisions for sharing that information with a legitimate mission context. The Alabama example was about prisoners with mental health issues leaving the jails, coming back to the communities, and wanting to share that information with human service providers in the community. So we think that this is really the future, being able to talk about interoperability at the policy level, encapsulating policy issues. It's more than just security and privacy. It's also what is the exchange context? What are the specific data elements you want to share? What are the constraints around indemnification, liabilities, and things like that? But we think that all of those things can be expressed formally, and you can be able to move towards information sharing agreements that are reusable, multilateral, and can be automated. We also think that this kind of an approach is really key for supporting agencies to mature and present a more increasingly mature information sharing face. The key challenge that we face, and I think this is something that we're really very centered on, the key challenge we face is helping agencies scale trust. Right? And this approach gives you that kind of context. Next slide. So where do you go to learn more about this? I mentioned the Standards Coordinating Council. That's been operating for a number of years. We have 3 international standards organizations, 4 government standards organizations, and several industry associations. They have a website, standardscoordination.org. There's more information there. There's tremendous amounts of information on our website, www.ise.gov. You can look for the building blocks of an ISE, and it talks about a lot of these things. And then finally, under the Standards Coordination Council, there's a very interesting new resource, a playbook. It's based on the U.S. Digital Services Playbook, but it's extended around 4 different concepts. The first is the idea of communities of interest. Right? In the government, any big problem requires a community of interest to come together. Nobody solves big problems all by themselves. So how do you coordinate? Bringing in security and privacy controls. Right? Again, in the space we all operate, there's a lot of information handling requirements that have to be addressed up front. The idea of a maturity model. When you have a community of interest, you want to share information. Not everybody has the same level of capability. How do you address that? And then finally, reuse of frameworks and tools. So all of those ideas are baked into the playbook. We're piloting this right now with many of our partners, federal and state and local. I encourage folks to take a look and provide some feedback.